Hello, welcome back to Poddenham Hotspur, your one-stop shop for all things Tottenham Hotspur podcasts, except for today when I'm also going to be talking about other Premier League podcasts. My name's Iain, thanks for tuning in. Spurs are in a decent place. We just beat Wolves, that's pretty cool. Nice to get a win underneath our belt for the first time in, 180 days, which is mind-blowing. I just can't even fathom at times how we managed to pull that one off. Of course, we did have a Champions League win or two in there, but league wins, it's been 180 days. Of course, it wasn't all good news. We had West Ham scrape out a win against Everton, who let us down tremendously, in a 2-1 win with a Callum Wilson late winner. And of course, we lost Xavi Simons to what is now known to be an ACL injury, putting him out probably until 2027, which, side note, isn't it mind-blowing that we're in 2027? Genuinely, it feels like living in the future, at least on the date that you look at on the calendar. And of course, we lost Dom Solanke probably for the rest of the season too, which is just another horrific blow that we have to deal with. It's been a sloppy game, let's be honest. We had control. I don't think we let too many chances come our way from Wolves. We just need to create and take our chances, which of course is now harder without basically a first choice front four. I do get the feeling that our press, which was a lot better against Brighton, even better against Wolves, is probably how we're going to create chances moving forward, a bit like we did in the early stages of the season under Thomas Frank. So, that's been my marker of a potential Spurs win for a long time, is how tight and how effective our press is. And if we can keep that going, we'll probably create turnovers and chances that don't require the same level of lock-picking that we might have got from Xavi Simons. Still a huge loss, even if you don't rate Xavi as a player. And I've gone hot and cold on him this year. He was in a decent run of form, and we've no idea if that would have continued. But he is at the very least a warm body. He isn't putting a further strain on our other players in our forward line, who have now got to come in and sub in for more minutes. The West Ham result, of course, was devastating. A real weird sense of that sort of 5 minutes between us scoring and climbing out of the relegation zone before Callum Wilson managed to knock in a winner for the Hammers. But here we are. This is just Tottenham season, isn't it? It's another one of them where it's our season in a microcosm, just like Brighton was. Brighton for different reasons. The disappointment, it's just been a weird time. So today, I figured it would be nice to revisit to one of my, earlier pod ideas, which was to look at how other people are talking about Tottenham. I spend a lot of time on this podcast, as you know, unless you're a new listener. What I do here is I review Spurs podcasts. But I spend a lot of time thinking about what Tottenham Hotspur fans say about us, and journalists who live in our bubble, or at the very least on the surface of our bubble. Last year, before the Europa League final, I covered how Manchester United fans talked about us and that game and what it meant to them. Kind of like a sentiment analysis. Big words for basically what are they saying about us. And I'm going to do the same today, except because I don't want to listen to Wolves, West Ham or Leeds or whatever fans, I wanted to go to like a general Premier League overview. So those big podcasts that tend to cover the whole league or even European-wide, games. So I put a question out to my followers on Bluesky, and thanks to everybody who responded, about who you listen to other than Tottenham Hotspur podcasts, which I know, calm down, they do exist. And the responses were actually more numerous than I expected. 15 different podcasts were mentioned, and the top 5 were the Tifo podcast, Libero, Stadio, the Football Ramble, The Guardian Football Weekly, and I hope that's 5. I get the feeling, yes, that's 5. And I'll try to put the full list in the show notes here if you just wanna review it and maybe pick up some new podcasts that you can check out. And that's one of the things I hope that you can get out of this episode today, is not only this view outside of the Spurs bubble, the good, the bad, the ugly that other people think and say about us, but maybe you'll find some new pods that you want to listen to. And I will be giving my opinions on some of these podcasts at the end of the episode. And I think you'll just pick up what I think as we go along. Now, the reason that I had to ask for, people to give their suggestions about what podcasts they like that are more general is because I've stopped listening to these broader, football podcasts over the last few years. I did used to have a couple that I would check out. I did, many years ago, I'm talking 5, maybe even 10 years ago, I did like the Guardian Football Weekly back when James Richardson was on it. I did move over to the Totally Football Show, I think, when he was over there. But I haven't checked out too many. Because over time, I've had a decreasing interest in listening to, especially recently, how well other teams are doing. Sometimes I wonder if I'm a football fan or a Tottenham Hotspur fan. I'm definitely one first, and that's a Spurs fan first. And I do enjoy watching football with mates, but sitting down by myself and just taking in a game that I don't have much on the line with, unless it's, maybe a rival, but even then that just stresses me out. I don't know, I found myself moving away from wanting to hear that. Of course, this is coinciding with more and more Spurs podcasts that I listen to, which are kind of dominating my brainscape. And especially since starting this podcast, where I'm listening to more and more Spurs voices and getting that, deeper and deeper into Spurs, the Spurs psyche. And it just hasn't given me time to listen to more general pods. I pick up things, watching highlights and stuff like that, reading the news. But the fewer and fewer Spurs podcasts, fewer and fewer general Premier League podcasts on my radar. I'm also a big fan of, as I've talked about this before, big fan of like DIY and outsider stuff. Bands who aren't major label signings, they're playing in somebody's basement, or they're putting out, their own releases. People who are writing their own newsletters about football, or making their own zines about music or something. Less so with kind of outsider art, but even then I like less popular stuff in general. And that's kind of really what Spurs podcasts have a lot of appeal for me. They are rough around the edges. There are mistakes that are made. People say things that they probably shouldn't say, opinions that aren't fully fleshed out, because it gives you a window into people's true self that hasn't been filtered through editors and, in many cases, advertising constraints, things like that. It's very raw and I enjoy it. And I think that when you listen to these bigger, more well-produced, in many cases, podcasts, they're either, professionals who work in the sport, either as journalists or broadcasters, ex-players, comedians who've got a lot on the line because, they host a podcast that makes money. So they are putting out a very sanitized version of football in many ways. Much more considered. They have much deeper knowledge of all the games that are happening. And that's kind of why I thought at this point in time it was interesting to listen to them with their broader view of the landscape and what might be happening around us that I'm not picking up on. Maybe you aren't picking up on either. I also have a strong ethos of not listening to people who hate me. Happily cut them out of my life. Because too often I listen to some of these podcasts and I hear negative critiques about Spurs or things that aren't fully considerate of our position. And I question, do they mean this? Is this a true statement? Or are they saying it because they hate us or dislike us or don't respect us? And that permeates through my listening experience with some of these bigger podcasts that cover more teams. I have a strong home team bias. as I mentioned, earlier, I like to go deep into Spurs rather than broader in general. That's how I want to use my time. And if I'm honest, there are enough Tottenham Hotspur supporters out there who talk about us like they seem to dislike us or are doomers, that you get enough conflicting opinions and discussion that you might get from outsiders too. I also find that and I'll touch on this later, but sometimes the discussions of Spurs can be surface level. And back when it was a much more sort of one-to-one ratio of general Spurs podcasts versus general football podcasts that I would listen to, that grated on me, the hearing people not knowing which players we identify as being important to a game, or what's happening with us, our injury histories, what the impact could be. And quite frankly, in some cases, I just started to dislike some of the presenters. I have similar things with some Tottenham podcasters, but I feel like I give them more grace because we're all part of the same community, right? We're part of the same tribe. Outsiders, I very much more quickly begin to push them out further, and exclude them from my orbit. And you could call that, a safe space or a bubble if you want to, be kind of prickly about it. But that's just where I'm at for my entertainment purposes. So of these podcasts that I listen to, and I tried to listen to as many as I could from the list, and I actually added in a few others too that weren't mentioned. Sadly, Libero this week was all about Atletico Madrid. So very interesting, not at all relevant to the subject of Tottenham Hotspur's relegation fight, other than to say that we beat them a couple months ago, or a couple weeks ago. Feels like a lifetime ago. So key points to pull out of these podcasts is that some of them do have a Spurs presence in some way, shape or form, especially the ones that I listened to this week. On the Guardian Football Weekly, we had Max Rushton, who's a Spurs fan, has written on the topic, has expressed that pretty clearly. And in fact, in that show, there was a bit of acknowledgement from him at least, and I think his co-hosts, that he was a Spurs fan and what he would be hearing or talking about would be difficult. Seb Stafford-Bloor showed up on the Totally Football show, and Tifo, because I think they're both Athletic-affiliated podcasts. I'd have to check that. Tom Allnut, who writes for The Times, I think, he shows up on The Tottenham Way. He was on The Game, which is The Times' podcast. And we had Gary Lineker, on The Rest is Football. Obviously, Lineker is a Spurs legend, winning the FA Cup with us in 1991. What I found interesting was that Spurs podcasters have generally grasped onto the psychological edge of us winning a game. The momentum that we could possibly pick up, especially building off of Brighton last week and overcoming that upset. Difficult odds, against the Wolves team that we've struggled to beat many times in the past few years. I think I heard the last time we beat them was under Nuno. That ghost, that spectre that's come back to haunt us through West Ham. But there's a momentum there. We haven't won for 180 days. That's gone, right? That's now no longer a thing. We've now won in the league. Let's get more. De Zerbi is picking up on that too and talking about it and trying to manifest it. But the outsiders, as I'm going to call them, general journalists, I don't know what's going to be least annoying for you as a listener, have suggested that yes, it could have provided momentum, but ultimately it was a bittersweet or a moot point. Any momentum that could have been gained. And I think they're thinking about this purely as like a points tally issue. Or perhaps it's the net momentum between Spurs winning 1-0 in a scrappy game versus West Ham going 1-0 up, controlling how they wanted to play the game, getting pinned back and then having a late, exhilarating winner is perhaps greater than what Spurs would have picked up from this 1-0. And that's an interesting sort of calculation that might be in play. I also do consider that it's because these people who haven't lived and walked in the shoes of Spurs fans and the potential relief that it could bring. But I think it is worth considering that both teams got momentum this week. I heard on a Spurs podcast, and forgive me for not remembering which one, it might have been Nice One Cyril. Maybe the Tottenham Depot, excuse me. Would you have taken if Spurs and West Ham stayed 2 points apart, regardless of the results this weekend, would you have preferred that to have come about through 2 losses, 2 draws, or 2 wins? Clearly, you, from a Spurs perspective, you need that momentum and you want it to be a win. So I think that maybe it isn't as great as it could have been. Those 5 minutes where we pulled out of the relegation zone were amazing. I did have to yell at my mate Max to put his phone down and not take a photograph of the table on the TV when we were out of the table, out of the relegation zone. And I keep saying 18th. I think I really should be saying 17th. Apologies. So that's it's something. I think it's something. I think it's a good catalyst. Every fire needs a spark, etc. Of those that offered a clear opinion of these broadcasters on podcasts that cover more games than just Tottenham, of those that offered a clear opinion, there was roughly a 10 versus 2 vote for West Ham staying up over Spurs. And I'm sorry to share that with you. The prevailing winds from the sort of wider football fan base and media seems to be favouring West Ham currently. If you accept it's a 2-horse race. Those 2 were, sadly, Tom Allnut of the Times, who does cover Spurs pretty regularly, so I think he would be a home team, supporter in that regard. And Sam Matterface on TalkSport's All Premier League Access podcast. There were 5 also that offered no clear opinion. They either discussed the games pretty matter-of-factually, or the vibe kind of just leaned towards West Ham. I feel like Spurs podcasters, when you listen to them at the moment, especially in the wake of the Wolves game, are more 50-50, leaning towards Spurs going down as well. There are some arguments about whether we'll stay up or not, but I think there's a sort of general resignation that this is more than likely to happen. I think Gareth Dace on the Games About Glory said he was 60-40 in favour of us going down, sadly. It's more based upon hope than evidence for the people who are perhaps more, hopeful. It's more hope than evidence in points and performances for people who think we'll stay up. And honestly, I can understand that. All we've got left are vibes. We haven't got players. We don't know if we have performances in us. We don't know what the tactics are going to be, but we do have potential vibes, and that's the kind of thing that we need to hold on to going through the end of the season. Personally, I mean, this 50-50 distribution of Spurs podcasters predicting we'll stay up, as I've kind of called it, aligns with something that I do when I'm asked to predict Spurs results. Is if I think we're going to lose, I'll say we're going to be a draw. It's going to be like a score draw or something. I'll bump it up if I'm talking to other Spurs fans, because it just makes you sound like less of a Debbie Downer. And I think we can all understand that. Some people are perhaps more honest than me, and maybe it's because that's just how I want to feel. There was a general sense as well from these Premier League podcasts that the teams that are still battling relegation, that's Spurs, Forest, West Ham, kind of Leeds, and there's a few other teams that I'll mention later, are kind of too good to be in this position. You can see from their performances of late, Forest, Leeds, and West Ham especially, although West Ham are getting a lot of draws, the players are pulling out performances. They're too good to be down there, and it's really exciting relegation battle for the neutral, which I find quite intriguing. It's kind of interesting to look at the way that players are discussed on these podcasts, because when you listen to Spurs fans talk about the team, we're focusing not necessarily on just a game as an isolated incident. We're looking at broader trends. So when I heard people talking about the West Ham game, and some of this has flowed on from the Brighton game, is we're focusing on the contributions of Bentancur and Basuma in midfield, Tell off the bench winning the corner that we eventually scored from, and obviously the contributions of Kinski in the last minute, Paulinho's goal, and perhaps the fight and bite that he could bring to the team moving forward through the end of the season, the role he might have, and obviously the loss of Xavi and Solanke. And also, on the negative side of things, they're focusing on Randall Kolo Muani's deficiencies as a player in a Spurs shirt this season. But if you listen to these Premier League podcasts, in the limited time that they're given to talk about Spurs, 5 minutes tops, they have to focus on the bigger stories, right? The things that people maybe have seen in highlights, or they have seen in highlights. They probably haven't seen the full game. And this might be kind of an obvious moment to you. I feel like it's worth just putting it out there, though. So they're focusing on Xavi, Kinski saves, and Paulinho's goal, right? That's it. So again, it comes back to what I was saying earlier about this shallow knowledge of the teams. Speaking of Xavi, we have the injuries. Again, for Spurs podcasters, the effect of losing Xavi and Solanke on top of everything else we've lost has been a tremendous focus this week. Some podcasts have spent the majority of their runtime debating whether it's fatigue, bad recruitment, bad medical staff, curse, somebody stepping on too many Legos, the stupid retractable pitch stuff, or something else. I mean, God knows. Nutrition. I've heard nutrition thrown out there as well, but the players aren't getting enough collagen. I mean, we're really clutching at straws here. So for us, that's what we're focusing injuries are. But the general pods are kind of just focusing on a very surface level and very much looking forward rather than looking back at things that have gone wrong to get us to this point. They're just saying, hey, Xavi seems to have been a potential talisman for Spurs, the same way Morgan Gibbs-White has been for Forest. I did note that Alison Rudd on the game was questioning our ability to identify players who aren't injury prone. So that was an interesting insight from an outsider's view that I haven't heard too many people talk about. And it was interesting to hear it broadcast to such a wide audience. I did like how second captains focused on the Spurs fan video of Xavi being made to jump by the medics and the things that were being said by the Spurs fans in the crowd recording it. Kind of less so about how little they chatted about our chances of relegation in general. But I thought that was a nice little focus on Spurs fans as people rather than Tottenham Hotspur as a sporting organisation. And I think that that's a big thing that gets lost in the filter of a more widely listened to Premier League podcast versus our niche, super deep, fan-created podcasts. So that's something to consider. I hadn't really thought about it until I spent some time this week reviewing and considering these podcasts and comparing and contrasting. The idea that the impact that this might have on fans, how they might feel, isn't always considered. There was some food for thought and potential copium for you out there who need it, myself included. Is that there were some discussions about whether Leeds and Forest could be sucked back into the relegation fight due to the fixture schedule. They're both playing bottom six teams. But there was also discussion about Newcastle, who are in a really bad run of form. And also Crystal Palace. So depending on how results might land, this could become an even more messy relegation fight. It feels more and more like it's going to go down to the wire, sadly. Sadly, is from a Tottenham perspective. Although I'd rather it go down to the wire than be done against Chelsea. There's been a real excitement from these Premier League podcasts about how good this relegation battle will be for neutrals, with the winnable games, teams hitting form, the drama, these late winners for Spurs and West Ham, the storylines that are bubbling up. For example, Morgan Gibbs-White, who was due to sign for Spurs, and as we know, famously, that deal fell apart, and now he seems to be Forest's saviour. There have been a few mask slips, though. In amongst that excitement about this relegation battle, I think a few journalists are forgetting that there might be Spurs fans listening. And maybe they just don't care. But Dan Bardell and Sam Dowling, I don't know, on the Guardian Football Weekly, both seem to revel and enjoy the thought of Spurs going down. And that really didn't sit well with me. And if I'm honest, that's consistent with how I felt about the Guardian Football Weekly for a long time. Sam even said that he'd have a smile on his face if Spurs went down. I mean, I just find this to be quite a repugnant sentiment to talk about, with these players who have, yes, they've been on the field, but the injury and the luck and things that have befallen Spurs this year, I think it's really quite callous to say that you'd be smiling about their careers being damaged. The effect on the fans, again, who've done nothing wrong here. We can't control how ENIC and Vinay Venkatesham and Daniel Levy and numerous managers and, yes, Johan Langer all spend their money, and how they shepherd the club through these waters, as well as the staff that are going to lose their jobs. So to hear both of them really seem to enjoy what's happening to Spurs, I thought was kind of gross. And I haven't looked into whether or not they've got a history of being Arsenal or Chelsea or West Ham fans. I don't know. I do find that there is a bit of a smugness about the Guardian Football Weekly, and you could say, well, of course it does, it's the Guardian. But that was one of those pods that I mentioned at the top of the show that I used to listen to and then grew to dislike. And that was mostly because of Barry Glendenning, who I grew to loathe and actually ended up a few times arguing with in the comment sections on The Guardian. It says a lot more about me than it does about him, to be fair. I will say that although Sam was talking about having a smile on his face, Dan was clear about this being through the lens of a big story of a top 6 team going down to the Championship. So I can understand that professionally. But I can't expect people to temper their excitement about this, because that might just be how they feel, right? It doesn't mean I want to hear it. I did say at the top of the show that I have concerns about these more general Premier League podcasts and the compromises they have to make to put out a product that is accessible to all, will drive up the largest number of listeners. I mean, it's worth remembering that their audience isn't Tottenham fans necessarily. They probably get more listeners by punching down on us than they do than being fair to us. So moving forward, who would I listen to? Well, just sort of rattling through a few of the pods that I enjoyed first. I like the Transfer Flow, which is very much more of a statistical approach to looking at the games, and they had quite a deep focus from Patrick and Neil on West Ham's underlying numbers and how they've relied on variance in their road to escape. This gave me some hope. A lot of their games have been on knife edges. They're not as good a team perhaps as their results are suggesting, but they're getting results, they're getting that luck. Spurs, as we know, have gone the other way. How many 1-0 losses have we suffered? I liked the Men in Blazers podcast with Rog, who I think is the Everton fan, very glowing about Richarlison, and Rory Smith, I think. I like that more than I expected, because honestly, I think maybe when you get the two main Men in Blazers guys together, Rog and I forget the other chap's name, the Chelsea fan, again, I find them a little grating. But with Rory on there, I found it more of a balance, and I did quite enjoy the way they discussed the games. Tifo, similarly, I can find Joe Devine and JJ Bull to be a little grating. I know it's a style thing, and honestly, I can be a little weird at times, and you'd think the way that they present their podcast would appeal to me, but just there's something that I can't vibe with. But they were okay in a smaller dose, like tuning in today, because there is such a deep football knowledge amongst those guys on the TIFO podcasts that I do have to fight through the packaging at times. Stadio was good, but I listened to so little European football that it wouldn't really be worth it to listen to more. Maybe if we get back into Europe in 20 years, perhaps if Stadio's still going, I'll listen. The BBC Football Daily was okay, as was the Totally Football Show. No complaints, just kind of vanilla. Quite like Second Captains. I like the way that they talked, I like the banter, but I'm just kind of a sucker for amiable Irish folk, if I'm being brutally honest with myself. And like I mentioned, I think I'll be staying away from The Guardian. I like Max Rushton. I didn't like some of the other stuff I heard on that pod. So what did I learn? And what have I communicated to you, my lovely audience? Did anything change my opinion? Well, I did find it useful to help me project forward in the next 4 games. And that might seem silly because we're so close to the end of the season. But there's so much stuff that's happened with all those names that I mentioned earlier in the Spurs leadership that I've spent some time being stuck on the mistakes that have led us here, rather than living in the moment and enjoying this win and hoping what's going to come next. And maybe that's avoidance on my part because I have resigned myself to thinking that we're not in a good place, to put it mildly. Hearing a lot of catastrophizing about what's going to happen if Spurs go down with financials, etc., etc. I would just wait, for anybody who's listening, just wait and let's just see what happens. It was refreshing to hear the big picture and to remember what's happening and to remember that we're a small piece in a much bigger landscape of football and that our narrative is huge to us but is much smaller in the grand scheme of things. And I think that zooming out was helpful for considering, things that are happening. And it's nice again to go out and kind of listen to people talk about excellence. Even if it is the scum up the road, it's still, it's refreshing. It reminds me of where we used to be and is where I want to get back to so badly. It was interesting to hear about what narratives about Tottenham were bubbling up to this wider audience. Things like injuries, the possible mentality change, and also just the fact that we're in the story about going down, but all these other things that we talk about that haven't been covered. There have been mild discussions about bad decisions to get here. Like I said, there was some mild, very, very surface level discussion about how the injuries came about. But yeah, just sort of hearing what comes up to this wider football audience was kind of cool. And it was nice to hear that most people were able to stay neutral. I mentioned some people on The Guardian earlier, and I really am putting the boot in on them today. But it was nice to hear that most journalists and most broadcasters, and even I would say like Alan Shearer, Michael Richards, they were able to keep themselves neutral in these episodes that they put out. Obviously, some were very scathing about our qualities, and perhaps it's some harsh truths in many regards. But I think that's understandable. There's an honesty that they have. Coming back to my point earlier about them speaking to a broader audience, there's no need for them to pander to Spurs fans. The way that some journalists who talk on Tottenham pods, View from the Lane, the Tottenham Way, when they make guest appearances, they know who they're talking to. And they want those people to keep coming back, and they have an affection for us. They're biased. I think they have an affection for us anyway. I hope so. So what do I think is going to happen? Has this changed my worldview? Yes and no. I think everything now moving forward is mentality, not the quality on the pitch. And honestly, at this point for Spurs, that might be a good thing because we're all out of quality. West Ham are showing it. They're showing that mentality. They're using the anxiety and tension of the situation to get results done. Spurs have taken another blow. We'll see if if they're going to rise to the challenge. Micah Richards made a point that it's all about holding your nerve at both the top and the bottom of the table, and it's who can do that through the end of the season. Spurs are going to pick up some points, so will West Ham. Whether we do that through De Zerbi's preferred style, or whether we're going to be more of a Nuno ball, or something more like the Europa League run that we saw last year. This was suggested by Tom Clark on The Game, and Milo on The Game is about glory, that we might need to shift to a more, scare quotes here, pragmatic style of football. Whether that aligns with the pressing that I mentioned earlier, I don't know. But if you're going to have a front line of, Tell, Kolo Muani, and Gallagher, I think that pressing is kind of all you've got. Maddison could be a difference maker in narrow games. I wouldn't give him minutes against Aston Villa because of Matty Cash potentially breaking his entire body, or Chelsea because I think they're going to be up for it, and we're looking at Battle of the Bridge Mark 2. But I'm hoping that Maddison can start getting some minutes here or there. There has been some chatter about whether you would just throw him into the fire and sacrifice any potential hopes of him coming back to full fitness or injuring him further. It was refreshing to hear, I'm forgetting her name, on Hometown Glory push back on this and remind everybody that he is a human being and that's not really fair to him. We heard that Forest or Leeds could get pulled back in. I'm not convinced they will. Forest still have a lot to play for this season. They've still got momentum to maintain in their Europa League push. Obviously, we hope that they can do something against Aston Villa in the first leg to really either tire them out, injure them, or give them something to play for in the second leg. If Villa are 4 or 5-0 clear of Forest in the first leg before they play us, where they can rest, they can focus on us, and they'll want to anyway. Don't get me wrong, but they'll be able to focus on us even more. 110% focus. But yeah, I don't think Forest and Leeds are going to get pulled in. I think they've done too much. And same with Newcastle. There was some chatter about them, but I can't see them dropping enough points and us picking up enough points, because I think that's what it comes down to. I'm concerned that we're going to lose twice. I'm very concerned about Villa, even though our form against Villa over the years has been suspiciously good. And Chelsea is just such a you can't expect to win against Chelsea at Stamford Bridge. We have a terrible record there. The players have done what Chelsea players always do, kick the manager out and hit form again. It means at most we'll get 6 more points. So we need West Ham to only pick up a win and a draw, 4 points, and then hope that we scrape by on goal difference. And sadly, I think that they're going to beat Leeds on the last day of the season. We can only hope that Leeds are still in the fight, and that might give us a chance. It's crazy. These permutations are insane at this point. Then possibly hope that Newcastle get a win against West Ham, but they're sliding quick. So that could be, I don't know. I'm coming down to some rambling here. So I think our best hope is that West Ham only win 1 game, or draw all 4, and Spurs or Spurs win 3 of their 4 games. And so we have to beat Villa this weekend for that second situation to come true. And I think it's just going to come down to the last game of the season and a potential coin flip. It's going to be tight. It's going to be awful. Be with your loved ones, have a drink, say your prayers to any and all of your gods, because it's gonna be rough. Both supporters and the players need to hold their nerve, especially if Villa doesn't go well. We've really got to push it down to the wire and just keep going. And I've spent the whole episode here considering and talking about Premier League podcasts, but keeping my fingers crossed that next year I won't be doing the same thing but with Championship podcasts. So thanks for using your precious free time to listen to me blather on about podcasts for the last, 40 minutes. If you haven't already, please drop a rating on whatever podcast platform you use. 5 stars would be great. I'm going to beg, just like an Uber driver would. Please drop a comment on Spotify. I try to respond to all of them where I can. I'm on YouTube too. I don't have a tremendous number of followers or views on there, but if that's what you prefer, that's great. And you can also follow the podcast on social media. I'm on Bluesky at poddenhampotspur.bsky.social. I also want to thank Neb Economou for producing my theme song. It is wonderful. Due to some sort of time considerations and recommendations I had from other podcasters, I've pushed it back to the end of the episodes now because of getting the episode started more quickly. Love Neb, love what he produced, and I'm so sad that I've made that change. We'll see if it really makes a difference. But if you like that song, the Rainbow Connection cover that you did, it's at the end, it's great. I think every now and then I'll bump it up for the start, especially when we're in happier times. He's a good lad, Neb. I value him. To everybody who tuned in, I just want to, I thought it was a fun little idea. I'd throw in a joke as a quick thank you for putting up with me for the past 45 minutes. Here we go. How many apples grow on a tree? All of them. All of them. So yeah, keep listening to and making Spurs podcasts. Up the Spurs.
Why are there so many podcasts about Tottenham? Do I want to know why? They might contain insight, but mostly delusions. If I hear one more, I might die. They don't like Levy and they don't like Enoch. They pine for Moo and Conte. Someday we'll like 'em, old Tottenham Hotspur, the podcast clout chasers and me.